Good morning. I'm John Jackson. We're going to do an oral history. The Florida Citrus Hall of Fame has a couple of missions, and one is to recognize individuals that have made significant contributions to the industry. But the other part is to tell the story of the Florida citrus industry. And one of the ways that we do this is through oral histories, which I really enjoy. So we talk to folks and get stories that are never recorded, and without this, they'll escape. So today, we're in the city of Winter Garden with Glenn Beck and Rick Freeman. So gentlemen, here's how this goes. We just are going to talk a little bit about your recollections in citrus, and we'll get some stories. I want to have you talk a little bit about some of the icons that were in Winter Garden that you can remember. But let's start off with your little history, and I'll start with Freeman and tell us your story. I know that your dad was in citrus, so go back and tell us a little bit about your introduction in getting into the citrus business.
Well, I'm not as long stretched out as some of these families. I'm only third generation. And the story be it, when my grandfather was a young man, he was the youngest of 8 brothers, had one sister, and small family farm in Hampton, South Carolina. Guy came through town in a covered wagon, which there were cars at the time, but he didn't have enough money for nothing. So he talked to the guy. He said he's headed to Florida to pick oranges. So Granddad said, well, can I jump on the back? He said, yep, jump on the back. So he left and came down here, and he went to work for Artie King, and basically started as an orange picker, which Mr. King took a liking to him. He quickly moved up to a foreman, quickly moved up to doing summer work, quickly moved up into being road boss. But he stayed with Artie King till 58. And in 58, the office manager of Artie King and him decided to start their own business, which was Freeman and McRae. And I don't know where Glenn's dad and granddad came on board, but it's somewhere in that neighborhood. Whether it was with Freeman and McRae or in the 50s, 60s where granddad was, I don't know. We jump forward to 68. Freeman and McRae had done everything. Everything they bought was 2. So they had everything numbered. So when it came time to split, they just tossed a coin to see who got even and who got odd. So basically, equipment was split. So we had trailers, like 6 or 7 of them that were exactly alike. We could get in there and pull up the serial numbers, and they were every other number. And so that's how they did it. And then in 68, or before that, Dad was working with Minute Maid. And he was actually the state production manager. And back then, Dr. Phillips and all had tons of fruit right around Orlando, and that was Dad's responsibility. And then other places, Minute Maid had big grows around Apopka and all through this whole area. But Dad and Granddad decided to start, Freeman and McRae were going to split. So they decided to open P.H. Freeman. And Dad was still working for Minute Maid because P.H. Freeman didn't have enough money. And about the time they opened it, Granddad became sick. He died in 3 months. So he was the first president, but he actually barely took the title when he knew he was going to die. And from there on, ups and downs because of freezes of different ones, which in 78, I came on board full time, which I started when I was probably 12 painting and pushing, but I came full-time in 78. In 80, I took over harvesting manager. Basically, our harvest manager quit after 20 years. So I went into the office and I told Dad, I said, look, I know I'm young, but I said, if I don't take it over now, you're liable to hire another guy for 20 years.
And you will be old.
And I will be old. So he let me take it on, and then which, you know what happened in the next 10 years in the 80s. So I went from harvesting over 1 million boxes. I think the very worst we went down to was 50,000. So it was brutal. And after the 89 freeze, which I was starting to look for a job because, I mean, we were at our knees. We were on our knees. We had already, Dad had sold some properties basically to make payroll. I mean, it wasn't pretty. So Dad and I both were in the office, and this short, overweight New York Jew walks in the office, and he said he just opened a juice plant diagonally across the road from us. He said freeze hits and he can't buy an unfrozen box of oranges for nothing because nobody trusts a short, heavyweight New York Jew. And so I put out, we agreed on a deal. We was gonna let us make a quarter box, which at that time was good money. And I put out a broadcast of letters that basically, I need unfrozen fruit. We'll work out a deal, good money. We know we got to pay up for it, but I need unfrozen oranges. Every behind the lake, every high hilltop we can find. So we had 4 or 5 people that started bringing fruit in, and we did that for the next 20 years probably. And basically it allowed us to build P.H. Freeman back. We bought acreage, planted the acreage, put in wells, on and on. It was able to make us back.
So you survived.
We survived. In 96, I became president. I became the 3rd president of P.H. Freeman, which in the 90s, it was pretty good. When the greening hit, 04
or 5, 6.
04 or 5. Okay, everybody says, don't fog, we gotta have 100% cure, don't fog. Which, fortunately, my caretaker, which at the time, we had a caretaker, and he was getting up in age, he retired, and he wanted, the smartest thing I ever did was admit I didn't have a green thumb. Some people have a green thumb and some people don't, and I don't. Glenn can look at a tree and tell you if it needs an extra shot of fertilizer or what, and I don't. So
he's a tree whisperer.
The smartest thing I did was let the Becks buy out our caretaker, and I committed to him full time. Okay. Let him, and since that time hit, I have never told him what to do to my grove. People will call me and, what are y'all spraying? I said, I don't know. You got to call Glenn or Mark. And that's how we did our caretaking. They did whatever they wanted to do, and I paid the bill if I could.
So tell me how you went from up there to finally getting involved with him. So your dad and uncle were involved in the citrus business, I believe.
They were, and if you go back to the beginning, I'm a 4th generation grower, and so the story goes, my great-granddad in England, he was the 2nd son in the family, so he knew that there was no inheritance for him. He didn't figure there was any reason to stay in England, so in 1885, he took a merchant ship to the United States, and I believe into Ellis Island, I think. Stayed in New York for, I think, 2 years, made his way down to Sumter County. gonna get in the citrus business and row cropping. So, and I don't know why one makes the decision to end up where they do, but so the story goes. So, planted groves in 1887 and started there. Then I guess everything was he farmed and had citrus. Then the 1894-95 freeze took that out. He moved from there to West Orange County, and we've basically been here in some capacity ever since. A little bit of history between the Becks and the Freemans, and we're sitting here trying to piece this, and a lot of it, all I have to go by is what I heard my dad say over the years, but we're actually entering into the fourth generation of our families working together. Our granddads did fruit deals together, and then our dads, and then Rick and I, and now our sons are they're actively working together now. So it's been a long-standing relationship.
But Glenn, you two of you are anomalies, and the fact that I've done a lot of talk reviews and so forth, and your families were like the few that were so persistent and committed to citrus. In spite of the freeze of 94, 95, they persevered and they went through. But you're even more committed than they were, because you've led the charge to stay in citrus. And I'm sure people look at you and think that you don't really have all your senses about you.
I am quite sure that has been said many times.
But you are, you two have what I call a genetic flaw, and you just got this citrus, love of citrus in your system, and you continue. So, what spurs you? What motivates you to keep going?
You know, and I don't know, you know, for lack of a better analogy, you know, it's a passion. You know, back whenever, you know, we were growing up, citrus was in its heyday, and you know, and whoever was successful at that time, you know, they could afford the finer things, and it was just, it was a way of life. It's what you did, and whenever you look at the history of the whole industry, how it started and how it's built up, and we're to the point right now, you know, we don't want it to die on our watch. You know, I want, you know, I want to pass that on. You know, I have been fortunate to be in line to continue and to grow, and again, it's just a passion. We all have to have an occupation. We all have to do something, and there's a lot of satisfaction into, you know, planting a grove, bringing it up, you know, producing a crop. And I think you would probably find that mentality in a lot of farmers. And it's just, again, that's pretty much the only way I can describe it.
Well, you know, I've talked to a lot of guys that grew up in the industry, and I'm going to assume that it was the same for you, that as soon as you were able to grab the end of a hoe handle, that Dad had an occupation for you to do, and you hoed trees, you spread fertilizer, and you did all that. You grew up in a grove.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll be the first to say, at the time, whenever I was doing that, I wanted to be anywhere except where I was. Rick and I, we were talking, you know, as far as in Winter Garden, which I grew up about 7 miles south of here. Well, it might as well have been 700 miles, because there was nothing. My brother and I, we'd always talk, you know, whenever school got out and we were out in the grove, well, we didn't come to town. We didn't see anybody. There were no neighbors. You know, that was what our summer consisted of. And I know people have often said, well, you know, you and your brother get along pretty good. You know, often siblings don't agree. And said, you don't understand where we grew up.
We had no choice.
If you were mad at your brother, guess what? You were by yourself, because there was no one else around. But no, that early days of working in the grove, of course, when you're a kid, and even whenever you're coming up into a teenager, you know, you hear what everybody else is doing. They're playing ball, and they're going
to the beach.
Yeah, they're going and doing this and that, and you know, and we weren't doing any of that, and so. there's a point in time you say, you know what, as soon as I can get out of here, I'm gone. Well, you know, things go on, and then you learn to appreciate some of the lessons, some of the work ethic that you've been taught, and then you start looking at the bigger picture, say, well, okay, you know, I could do this the rest of my life. And you know, there were a lot of early lessons that, you know, were good, and although as a kid you don't realize it at the time.
Well, as I say, a lot of folks develop character on the end of the hoe handle, and you two guys did. I grew up in the city. My wife, Catherine Hanson, back here, grew up on a dairy, and I hear the same story. The school bus got there and dropped them off, and there wasn't any playing. There was cows to milk, stalls to clean. For you, there was trees to hoe, fertilizer, and all that kind of stuff. So it's fascinating that we've continued. When you guys got into the citrus business as young men, there had to be so many icons in this city.
Oh,
that
gosh.
the names, and let's just talk a little bit about you kind of grew up in an environment here, and as young men getting into the industry, there were so many folks. Your dad's office was right next door to a guy that worked for Pasco and was one of the icons. When do you remember your first encounter with Charlie Root, and how old were you, and what kind of relationship did he have with your dad? They must.
Well, they were best of friends. And my first encounter was on the tennis court. Charlie Root loved tennis, and we played a men's double one night of the week. I don't remember what night, and then every Saturday morning, early, and we played doubles. And they called it the Charlie Root Club, but Charlie, his office was where our office is now. We bought it from Lakes Pasco. We bought his house next door. I guess he bought it from Lakes. He passed, and his widow decided to move to Winter Park where her daughter was. So I did it way ahead of time. I said, look, have the house appraised. I'll pay you that amount, and you move whenever you want to. And that's how I acquired that house. And I ended up buying the shop next door that was Lakes's, and then became AWF. You remember that? You think, Glenn and I were talking about it earlier. I mean, around Winter Garden for a long time, it was the hub of citrus.
Oh, yeah.
Because number one, we had the train station, and then you had 5 or 6 or 8 packing houses within a long walking distance of right here. And I mean, and powerhouses. I mean, South Lake, Heller Brothers, which is still going today. They don't run a packing house anymore. But McMillan family, the Tilden family.
Winter Garden CGA.
Winter Garden CGA.
Both of them.
South Lake. I mean, on and on. I mean, there were, I mean, Freeman was really more of the working people. But it was kind of a funny story. Dad and I were riding down around where Artie Keene ended up developing years ago. And I was pretty young, and I said, Dad, why in the world didn't Granddad buy in here around these beautiful lakes instead of way out in the middle of nowhere with no right of way hardly? And he said, well, don't forget, your granddad worked for Artie Keene. So it's been but you know, it's been great because even back then, we were all competitive with each other, but yet we were friends with each
There
other.
were no secrets, were there?
Yeah.
I can remember having meetings, and growers didn't mind sharing what was going on. Well, what the hell are you doing for this damn dipreppies? And you wouldn't say, well, not much. We'll share and share alike. We might be competitors, but we're also in the same business. Talk about Charlie Root. I remember someone telling me about Charlie playing tennis, and they said Charlie was the only tennis player I knew that never had a backhand. He
played both ways.
He switched the racket to his left hand. It was always a forehand, either from his right hand or his left hand. Isn't that amazing? Yeah. What do you remember about George Howard?
I do not. This is another subject that Rick and I were talking about. again, a lot of the people in town or that were associated with the industry, I really don't have a knowledge of, simply because we were.
That's right. You're a kid. I forgot that.
Yeah,
You're just a kid.
But we were but even in later years, we were just so far removed from where everything was going on. So we were
isolated. You know, when you're the extension agent, some people think that you get what you pay for. And since they didn't pay me a salary, I was an unpaid consultant. I didn't get to interact with all the growers. I didn't have much to do with your dad or your brother, or you, as for a matter of fact. Now, when Atwood came along, he straightened you out, but I didn't have a chance to do that. But there was this camaraderie that existed, and as a young man in the business, a lot of these guys took me in, and I can remember. But I would deal with George Howard, and George could tell stories, and he mentored more young men, I think, than most anybody. Gosh, I'm trying to remember. Names leave me right now, but anyway, wherever you go, somebody was mentored by George, and he was an icon. And your dad was a strong leader. Another guy that I interacted with, it was a dynamic person. It was Dan Richardson, right? Dan McKinnon, I'm sorry. Mm-hmm. And Dan was kind of one of the unspoken leaders of the area here. And I think Dan was able to tie into the political side. He knew who you needed to go to, how you needed to get things done. And when they were going to drain Lake Apopka, Dan basically said, "You're not."
Yeah.
And what have you? Did you have much dealings with?
Well, later on, sometime in the 80s, we acquired Killarney's entity into the Winter Garden plant. Up until that time, we had delivered fruit there and other people. We weren't a member. And so we bought that entity. So Dad was on the board, always went and sat on the back row, which Dan McKinnon was sitting there at some meetings, he never said a word. But let me tell you, when he spoke, everybody listened. He just had that authority that when he spoke, everybody knew he didn't talk that much, but when he spoke, he meant what he said.
He was, I can remember a big cigar and with Dan. There were others kind of in the other direction. I always remember Bill Matthews was quiet, unassuming, but I think that Bill Matthews would probably come close to Glenn as far as being a tree whisperer and understanding trees. And you took Dr. Ziegler's words to heart that the best thing that you can see on an orange grove is the owner's footprints. And you rode groves and walked groves. Bill Matthews rode groves and walked groves. And most importantly, Bill Matthews could get along with Everett Fisher. And you have to admit that was a remarkable assignment. But so I remember Bill, and the thing that always impressed me about Bill was that he'd talk to me, and then he would thank me profusely as if I had shared something that he didn't know. And he forgot more about going sisters than I would ever know. But anyway, those kind of folks. Anybody else that strikes you? I mean, we can always go back to Hoyle Pounds, who was remarkable and
put the first rubber tires on his tractor.
Yeah. And having never been in the citrus management or growth type thing, I learned in a hurry that the most important person on your crew was the mechanic. And you don't think about it too much, but if the tractor ain't running, you ain't making money. And you probably were the mechanic for most of the time until you finally got to the point where you had to be in the field.
Yeah, and things were, you could work on them then. I mean, everything was just mechanical. The tire was flat or the fuel line was broken, but pretty much with a toolbox, you could fix anything you pretty much needed to fix. The age that we're in now with computers and software and diagnostics, all of that is out the window. but you would have to improvise in a lot of cases, but you could pretty much always keep going. There was, sometimes, and I go back to those early beginnings, you kind of wish, maybe it'd be nice if it did stay broken down for a day, but that usually never happens. So, but you had mentioned Rick was talking about his recollection of Charlie Root and playing tennis, and again we're kind of different in the fact that whole thing is so foreign to me. Again, where we were at, there wasn't with working for my dad, and there wasn't a whole lot of camaraderie, and there wasn't a lot of social time spent talking because that was cutting into work time. And with him, his basis was physical work. You started at daylight, you went till dark, and that was pretty much it. There wasn't, a lot of times he felt like, okay, I know exactly what I need to do. I don't need any information from anybody else. I just have to get it done. And that was kind of the way my brother and I grew up. So.
Yeah, but you took on a little bit different approach, Glenn. You've assumed the role of giving your time and your commitment to the industry. It hadn't just been about your little caretaking business. What motivated you to decide that you were going to step up and do more than just look after grows?
You know what, and and kind of again a love for the industry. I grew up in it, and often you try to, I won't say correct past mistakes, but don't necessarily go down the exact same path that your predecessor did. So and a lot of times we'd talk to people and say, yeah, I found this out from so and so, and I found this out, and that often there was value in knowing what was going on, talking to other people and getting information, and sometimes there's something useful came out of that, sometimes not. But I didn't want to basically be in the shadows and never interact with anybody. So I guess just wanting the industry to continue and be a part of it, I guess, is what's led me to act a little bit differently than my dad.
Well, a lot of I've talked to some folks, and names come to mind. You're like a Jim Simpson, and Jim attended meetings and was chairman of the box tax and everything else. And when I asked him, he said, "Listen," he said, "I do this," but he said there's a little bit of selfishness involved because I glean some things when I go to these meetings and when I'm involved, and as a result of that, Jim became buddies with Jody Whitney at Lake Alfred and got the drawings for a mechanical harvester and built one in his shop in Mount Dora. He'd get a problem, he'd call Jody and get the engineer to help. But I want to talk one more thing, and I got a couple of questions for you. When I left the Extension Service, I went to work for the Coordinating Council, and I got labels for low volume application. How did that come about? You were the instigator of that, and you. Next thing we know, you're doing low volume, and nobody else had even thought about that. Where'd that come from?
Well, it kind of first started. We knew greening. It had been detected in South Florida. We knew it was here. Knew that the psyllid was the vector, and my brother had taken a trip to Brazil and saw firsthand at how the devastation of acreage down there. So kind of when it came back and we talked about it, said, hey, we have to do something or we're going to be out. And I think they had done some low volume down there, except they deemed it that really unsuccessful. I don't know whether they were using a different type of fogger or something like that. And I think that they said, well, it worked, but not to their satisfaction, and they were going to conventional spray. But we knew that their cost of growing down there is totally different than ours, and there's no way we could afford to do what they were doing. So we had to have something fast, something effective, and we just kind of went a little bit rogue on that whole thing, just out of desperation. And initially starting off, many of the materials, they didn't have a label that would accommodate that. And, there was a little gray area in some places, and we may or may not have taken advantage of that. And all of these have since amended labels, and everything is fine. But again, it was, we didn't feel like we could wait on anything. It was so time sensitive, so critical that, this may be it. So hey, let's jump in and let's do something.
This is so typical from my observation that farmers are extremely creative in figuring out things, how to do things. Some growers are frustrated ag engineers, and they got to be tinkering with something. Skip Wilson was always building a better herbicide applicator, and then there are others who were frustrated entomologists, or Fred Saunders was a bug guy, and all these kind of things. But researchers will be working on things, but Freeman figured out how to use water for cold protection. Mm-hmm. And then the university said, oh yes, here's what you're doing, and they provided an explanation. So you went in and figured out that we can put on a pesticide at 5 gallons per acre or whatever, and control the pest. And then the people at Lake Alfred followed up and said, oh, and then they probably gave an explanation of what was going on. But growers pointed researchers where you needed to be going in some of these areas. And so I think your leadership in that, and you couldn't afford to put out 1,000 gallons to rate
No.
control, so you had to go some other direction. So you figured it out, which, that's, and you shared it with others, and it became a standard practice for quite a while to do it. And now you're struggling with other methods that you can deal with greening and injecting antibiotics into trees and all of that kind of wild stuff. I'm completely out of touch with that. I was fortunate that I retired about the time greening came along. Can't imagine how, as an extension agent, it would be difficult to go say, yeah, Rick, you got greening. You say, what do I do? I got no idea how to deal with it. But so you're still hanging in here. You're picking fruit. You got
H2A label.
And so where are we going? We produced, 15 million boxes last year in the state or something like that?
Brutal.
And Lake County grew 44 million boxes in 1980.
And mine and Glenn's grows the only ones alive today. Oh well, Bill Glenn's got a little bit, a few other little people, but not much.
What motivates you to continue? Where do you see this industry going?
Before I answer it, let me toot Glenn's horn a little bit, because you're looking at the materialistic of fogging that they started. Let me tell you the financial part. So our trees were very well shaped, great. Greening's tearing up South Florida. They start fogging, and I agreed to pay the check. Didn't know what I was doing, but I paid the check. And for the next 4 to 5 years, the two families, we were getting about what today's prices were on fresh fruit. I mean, we both really did well because of their fogging. Now, the whole industry was turning a blind eye that fogging was good. I even raised my hand and spoke in the Tinker Committee, and they basically shut me up and said, sit down, because that is not 100% cure, which that was the last time I attended that meeting. But we financially probably were able to survive due to the fogging machine. So it's been it was a good thing for us. I guess, my dad told me that he would keep the land if he could, And I've kind of told my son the same thing. If I can live half comfortably, that I would do the same thing. Some of the land now belongs to my sisters and brother-in-law, and they pretty much said the same thing, that they will pass the land down if they can. So, yeah, it kind of gets in your blood, the business. You like to see it grow. You like to see the trailers pulling out. But it's also, things were passed down to you. You kind of want to pass them down.
Like you said, he didn't want to be in charge of the ship when it went down.
Yeah, same here. Now, my son has now taken over as president. And so, and I preached to him. I said, look, I said, we passed this thing down, and if you have to sell, I expect you to put that in a trust where you can live comfortably off the interest, but it gets passed down. I said, don't sit here and blow the money, because money disappears and land doesn't. And that's really been a key factor, because the value of land, I can remember land up and down 80 Avalon Road, which is kind of the main stretch, jumped up to 30,000 an acre. And I mean, people started selling up and down there. And they literally would call me up and call the Beck stupid for not selling. And I'd say, look, all I can tell you is they like growing oranges. It's none of my business. And years later, what they had to sell, they got a lot more than that. And to their advantage. And most of the time they didn't sell because they had to. I mean, you know, either the school or something else. And it's just been good for both families. We've survived. We've got land that, you know, our kids can either sell or keep, but hopefully it will mean something one day.
Are you looking at it, even taking a look at different alternatives like cups, the greenhouse deal? Have you investigated that at all? Is that something that?
No, I didn't have enough money for cups. But I did.
80,000 acres, a rather expensive price.
Yeah. In 2019, the people that were the original in the fresh squeeze business back when, that helped me survive, we all came together, met up at a bar somewhere, and one of them says, I got this guy in Vero that we could all go together and buy him out. There was 9 of us originally. It ended up, but we bought Lambeth Groves, and I was partner in it. And it was very good for us and Glenn both. We delivered our best oranges down there, and it was very well. I had to sell it in 19. And just because we had an offer and all the other partners wanted to sell, so I had no choice.
You're outvoted.
But it was to my advantage probably, because a year later COVID hit, and that they lost a ton of money. And so we probably wouldn't be able to survive, but the new owners had enough deep pockets, they did. So, I mean, it's been a wild ride, and, you know, I begged my son to go to college because I didn't think we'd make it, but we have, and now he's president. But, and my grandson would like to be involved, but yet I have no idea. And, you know, one thing I'm telling him, I said, you going to college because you might be hunting for a job. So
we don't know the dynamics, you know. What do you think of cups in the greenhouses? Have you? You know, it's not a solution, but for some people, it's doing all right.
And I think the ones that are engaged in it so far are doing very well, and I certainly hope that they do. But ever since Greening got here, there has been this search for, you know, some type of a altered tree, an edited tree, or some kind of a cure or therapy that will allow you to grow it in the field. So I would just, in the cups, it's such a large investment. Ultimately, that fruit, you know, and it is pretty and all that, but it's going to have to compete on the same market that the field fruit and everything else does. So that's I've never wanted to engage in it, just for that reason. And also any fruit that we grow, we compete with the world now. It used to be if anything, citrus or watermelons or vegetables, everything had a season, and I remember the advertisement, the first fruit of the season and the first melons of the season. Well, now we're in this global chain now that you can get anything you want 12 months out of the year. And the citrus, the imports, a large portion of it comes in from South Africa, it comes in from Argentina, it comes in from Spain, Australia.
Mexico.
Mexico.
Yeah.
And right now, even on the juice front, Egypt is emerging as a huge player in the juice industry. And so all of that, so whatever cultural practices that you employ here, just know that your competition around the world, it all comes down to what they can produce it for and what they can put it in here, and can you stay competitive. Often the production cost in these other areas is far less than what we have. I think that Florida may, as time goes on, may have to kind of reestablish more of a local type market, or maybe not be as much in the mainstream, but really
niche markets.
Go on that product recognition.
Yeah.
Because that's one thing that Florida does enjoy. If you go to other parts of the world and you mention orange juice, you say, well, do you know where orange juice? And most often your answer will be Florida. It was such an iconic industry and so recognized worldwide that it still carries a lot of that recognition.
It does. So, Glenn, are you planting many new trees? Are you does a grow with greening get to the point where you decide that the best alternative now is to plant newer varieties and rootstocks, and with the technology you can grow and be in business relatively quickly? Is that and how difficult is it to make a decision? Look at all the damn varieties that are coming out and all these rootstocks. And I noticed in the magazine the other day that IFA's released 8 or 9 varieties, and I assume they must be for you to test or to experiment. They do a limited amount of testing.
Yeah, on some of that, well, to answer your first question, yes, we are still planting. We're going forward. A lot of the groves the older trees that have succumbed to greening, we're just aggressively resetting, putting trees back. We're even planting some new acreage as well.
The first 3 years or 4 years, you
No.
can do gangbusters. Are you still allowed to use pesticides that on non-bearing trees and that are pretty effective?
Well, actually, the number of materials that you can use continues to shrink. So it does take a lot longer to bring one into production in the era of greening than it did before. There's still some, but as far as new varieties, a lot of times, you don't know what that variety is going to do in 10 years or 15 years. So a lot of what we're planning is closer to what we've done before, just employing different techniques to keep it going and keep it alive. How you say, well, how do you decide to keep going or whatever? And that's basically, at the end of the day, is there any money left to plant some more trees? And that's what we do. If we come up, in 1 year that there's, there's no money for this, okay, we'll take off a year. But we've always constantly just whatever we made, plowed it back in, either in the purchase of more grove or trees or something to that degree. And again, I get questioned on that because, as you said earlier, I think sometimes we're looked at that, the sky's not all there. But you know what? It doesn't matter. If I had all the money in the world, I'm not going to live any different than what I'm doing right now. I can't sleep in but one bed and live in one house. And
obviously, you enjoy what you do, and you're a visionary, Glenn. You see beyond the disaster that's here, and I think you can visualize that we're going to find a solution somehow, and it's going to be, the industry won't be like it was before.
No.
At one time we had 56 processors in Florida, and now we have what, 4 that are going. So it's going to be different, but you guys and your families are going to be part of the new direction that citrus goes, and that's got to be terrifying, but it's got to be exciting. It's got to be challenging, and to have family that's willing to pursue that is also got to be extremely rewarding. You know, that's great, and I reached the point where I would be terrified, or I don't know what the word is, if trying to keep up with all the technology that's out there now. It's changed so much. Just God, I've been retired 25 years, so maybe I shouldn't say in the last few years, but what you're doing now is not even close to what I would recommend you be doing back when I was an agent. And now to have to go through all the options with varieties. I went down to the foundation farm with Peter Chairs and looked at the Donaldson tree down there. That didn't impress me at all as going to be the savior for the citrus industry, but yet people are excited about it.
Yeah, and I think anything that looks, somewhat better at the time, everybody, their resources are gone, kind of out of desperation. If anything, you think this might be it, and everybody gravitate, or a lot of people will gravitate toward, what they think may be. In the end, nobody knows.
Yeah. I drive to Gainesville and to the villages to the doctor, and I go out by Lake Yale, and Chuck Allison and Cliff Whitaker, and have still planting citrus out there. So I see it, and they have gone from Tango to Ori, and Chuck clipped off 20 acres of red Naples that never passed. And I guess greening, one of the impact it has is that it impacts the quality of the juice, but they're still persisting, and it's nice to see a grove. But on the other hand, it just terrifies me. Really bad to drive 429 or Avalon Road. How you get lost? I couldn't even find a golf course down there, taking my grandson to play golf. Hamlin, there's a damn city down there, and can you find your way home at night? I bet they probably put a road up. You could get lost.
I can, and it's one of those things. I remember as a kid, I would hear my dad, and he grew up here, telling the stories as, well, I remember, when. This used to be a dairy here, and this used to be farm field, and he would actually even talk about Winter Garden here and say, well, he remembers when everything north of Plant Street down to Lake Apopka was all row crops. And so I would hear these stories, as a kid, and I'm thinking, that's like, 1,000 years ago. Cannot imagine that. I remember when this road, which is the main thoroughfare now, was a dirt road that went through the woods. And now I look around and I can find that the stories that I can tell in the change are far more dramatic than what he was telling me.
Yeah, we used to run Fox over there all the time, and now there's a Walmart there.
And for example, you
heard that story, haven't you?
You go down 535 where Fowler's Grove is. We've done a lot of caretaking work out there. I've been up and down every middle of it, and you had mentioned Hamlin out there. We used to spray that herbicide it. We took care of it, and there's so many places that, actually a piece out off of 535 that when we had a little bit of a family, my uncles in the state, they had some that they had to sell off. Well, a church was built on this piece out at Chase Road in 535. So, and we go to that, and we attend that church sometimes, and I'm sitting in that church, and we usually go there at Christmas time, and I'm thinking, I know that I'm the only one that's driven a tractor over this spot where we're sitting, and I could just duplicate that all over town. How much change there is.
I take my two oldest grandsons. Their dad's a big golfer. They're a golfer. They played on their high school golf team, and we'd go to meets, and I never hit a golf ball in my life, But I'd go watch them and I'd say, gosh, Nick, this golf course doesn't look anything like it did the last time I was here. And they say, well, Grandpa, you don't play golf. I say, yeah, but the last time I was here, this was a beautiful orange grove. And so they're playing down at Kings Ridge or Bella Vista. And you've seen the transition to all these things that you used to play as a boy in, and now it's a subdivision. But anyway, I marvel at both of you and your families and the way that you have continued to carry on the heritage and the tradition of citrus. And I'm optimistic, Lynn, that we'll come to a point where we might have niche markets, but Florida will still be recognized as a producer of quality citrus, and
I believe so.
We'll have different options. People and growers will come up with clever ways to do things and figure it out. But I'm trying to tell the story and with some things, and it's there's not near as many people that remember that in the springtime you walked out of the house and you were blown away with that magnificent smell of orange blossoms, and you knew the first day that they cranked up Winter Garden citrus products, because when the dryer went pelletizing the pulp, there was a different odor in the air. And but how many people know it? I'm pleased that the city of Winter Garden has elected to preserve and share citrus history. It's all around here, you know, with the museum, and even though you become a millennial town and encourage visitors to come in and bikes and everything else, but still citrus is a strong flavor here. And you go down the road, and what used to be the Gem of the Hills is now some pre-Olympic training town, and those people over there don't even realize that for 125 years citrus was the economic backbone of this area. And,
one funny thing, well, not funny, I think our future, right now we're depending on injections. The problem is injections has made the tree better, made the tree greener, but it has not showed a significant amount more boxes. But worse than that, it hadn't showed more bricks. And that's going to be a key factor of whether we can survive. Because, I mean, injections is expensive. And it's a key factor of whether injections can actually make a better piece of fruit and put more fruit on the tree. You can't eat leaves.
no, you got to have solids. That's what you get paid for.
Yeah. But a humorous story, because, you know, I'm downtown Winter Garden. I'm probably the last 3 acres in downtown. The city tolerates me because I don't need anything. But years ago, the city planner came down. We had a warehouse that was right beside the corner of the road. And he came down and said, you got to tear this down. I said, well, why do I have to tear it down? He says, because it's too close to the road. I said, really? Come here. I walked him inside the fence inside, and I said, see that rail? And we had a rail post and all. See the donkey marks in the rail? That's where my grandfather tied the mules up for planting row crops all up and down this road. So if the road cannot be this close to my barn, you need to move the road. So
And you moved it?
no, they backed off of me, but I eventually tore it down because it got where it's leaning so bad. But it was, I like.
You were here first. Yeah.
But whenever you go back to that history, you know, and you know, going back to the citrus history and agriculture, and most people never knew what was here, but every town, you know, in this state has an agricultural background. You know, there's no towns that were built here to receive, or of the older ones, to receive tourists or manufacturing. You know, those just were not the industries. So, you know, pretty much most Florida towns were built on agriculture at some point.
We were in the agrarian area. And the packing house was the heart of every citrus city, you know, from Ocala south. And what do you say? at least 5 or 6 big packing houses in Winter Garden. They started off as smaller ones and consolidated. And the magnificent thing about the Citrus Packing House was that it didn't open until after school started. So the ladies, kids were in school, they packed, made enough money to have a second income in Christmas. The packing house shut down before school was over, and it was a perfect entity. And I tell this story every time, and so people that watch these videos say, oh, is he going to tell that story again? But a lady in Umatilla wrote about the packing houses up there, and she said that on Saturday night, in the afternoon when they shut the packing house down, the guys upstairs would move all the boxes over, put a board over the hole where the boxes went down into to be packed. Yeah. And folks brought up lemonade and roller skates, and they roller skated and had lemonade in the box making area of the packing house. And so now I just marvel, our grandkids are playing with a video game. Yeah. And back then, you were in the Grove, you were working with painting a trailer or doing something like that, and we got to kind of get kids back out doing some things. That's a whole different direction. Well, we could go on, and I just, once again, let me tell you how much I appreciate and marvel at what you guys have done and continue to do, because it's a story that you're preserving in reality, and we'll see where it goes. But you've made a significant contribution to the industry, even though that wasn't your intent. But fortunately, your love of the industry has allowed us to continue to hang in there, and we'll see what takes place. The scientists might be able to insert a gene, or we might be able to find a tree. I'm surprised that some of these escape trees we haven't been able to propagate and do so well. But anyway, that's it. Thanks, gentlemen. I appreciate it. If you haven't got any other comments to make, but now's your chance. If not, we're offline.
Well, I guess one problem we have is that any given moment we could have a freeze. One year the injections may not work and take us out. I mean, we're an eggshell moving forward.
Yeah, but you can deal
we've overcome so many obstacles.
You can deal with a freeze. I think you could put water freeness so you could deal with a freeze.
Oh yeah, we run water every time it gets.
Yeah. If I could tell you that we're going to have a freeze every other year, but get rid of greening, I know what you'd do.
Yeah.
You know what? The Spanish explorers brought citrus to Florida. I can't believe it's going to end now.
Yeah.
The industry is not going to be ever what it was. It doesn't need to be. It just needs to be here in some capacity, and I believe wholeheartedly it will be. We don't know what it's going to be market-wise or culturally or growing, but it will be here. So, and if it is, God willing, I want to be a part of it.
In a few years, you'll be sitting in this seat talking to the next generation and say, tell me again, how did you develop that particular technique for saving your trees and making it go forward? So yeah, people like you are going to be the light that keeps this thing going until we find a different direction. Thanks.
Thank you.